It had been a long trudge. Quiet, the flock of sheep that trudged with him, now quietly grazing among the rocks and bushes. Moses gripped his staff as he lowered himself onto a smooth rock, and he looked around. There was his flock, his father-in-law's flock. But he knew the sheep. His eyes wandered around the flock looking for his favorites. It was the gray one. Moses always kept him close when they were walking. Too many times had the gray wanderer strayed off. Too many times had Moses had to run after him, pull him back. He was a curious sheep, so Moses kept him close. Moses' eyes drifted again, searching more. There was another favorite. He could tell because one side of his woolly coat grew faster than the other. Somewhere closer to Moses, a pure white sheep moved nearer. He was always the cleanest, somehow seeming to look as though the world wasn't actually made of dirt and mud. His coat was thick and full, with no patches or missing wool. The sheep moved away slightly as he continued to peacefully graze. Moses leaned his head against his staff as he watched the sheep move away. Moses knew that the sheep carried a scar. It had happened some time ago. The animal was just a baby, a young lamb, and he had run away, caught its back leg in some burrow and snapped it in half. Moses had carried the sheep, just a lamb then, until the back leg healed. Now the sheep was grown, not a scratch anywhere, but it never ran again. Moses gripped the staff harder. He breathed in deeply, a long, steady inhale, and then out again. He was not a young man, and these treks made him more tired than they used to. The flock was spread out, but they were safe. Moses closed his eyes. He had been bitter once. He wasn't now, but he had been. This was no life for a prince. Moses was never a prince, not really, but he had been. He had it all: power, money, position, but most importantly, he had influence. Did no one understand how important it was that he had influence? Moses thought about his tribe back home. He thought about them every day. Some days he was angry. Some days he was bitter. He wasn't now, but he had been. What a ruler he would have been. And they ruined it for him, for themselves. Did they not know that God himself had picked Moses to rule over them? Why else would God have plucked him from the Nile and placed him in Pharaoh's house? He ate with Pharaoh, with the whole royal family. If only his own family could have seen that. If only they hadn't been so jealous of him. What a shame. He didn't now, but he used to wonder if they ever regretted what they'd done. It wasn't the whole tribe, he knew that. But if they hadn't talked about him behind his back like they must have, they never would have accused him of being an Egyptian. Him, Moses. It wasn't bitterness anymore. Maybe loneliness or sadness. What a shame. What a loss for his tribe. Moses' eyes were closed, his imagination open. He kept listening to his flock. He could tell by their bleating if they were safe. He had been a shepherd now for many years. He would know. Moses thought of the story of Joseph. how God had raised him up to the throne of Pharaoh, how Pharaoh had trusted Joseph with everything, how Joseph had saved his brothers in spite of their treatment of him. In fact, it was because of their betrayal that they were saved. But this was so much different. If only his tribe could have known that by betraying Moses, they would lose all hope. This was worse. Even Joseph would know how important it was that Moses had influence. Moses sighed again. What fools. He knew they envied him, his life, his wealth. But it was the influence that mattered the most to Moses. Did they not see that too? He wasn't after a life of ease. He didn't care about the money or the power. It was the influence. That's what was so important. Fools. Did they not understand how difficult it was to be influential? They all thought he was there just to enjoy a life of ease, and of course, they would think that. They couldn't see his heart. If they could have seen his heart, they would have known. He was waiting for the right moment, the perfect time for Moses to act. How could they not know? Moses had killed an Egyptian. They should have seen then and there how much Moses cared for them. Just imagine what would have happened had they trusted that Moses knew what he was doing. Of course, God was going to give him the throne in Egypt. That's what he did to Joseph. Why was Moses any different than Joseph? It was only a matter of time. His people just had to be patient and wait. And God would have raised him up to the position of authority that he had given Joseph. Why didn't his own people trust that? They did not know how much influence Moses had with Pharaoh. Had they known, they never would have threatened to report him to the Egyptians for killing one. Such a shame. Such a waste of influence. What hope did they have now? Moses had been bitter once. He wasn't now. But if he had been, he would have reminded himself that they deserved to stay in Egypt as slaves. He was the best hope they had, and they ruined it for themselves. Let them stay there another 100 years. What difference did it make to Moses? When will there ever be another Israelite with as much influence in Pharaoh's court as Moses had? What hope did they have now? Oh, the influence they threw away. Moses sighed again and slowly stood up. He was not a young man anymore. He started to walk around his flock, counting and checking, making sure that they were all there. He was too busy looking around his flock to notice where he was placing his feet. And as he moved his weight from one to the other, the sandal on his left foot got stuck between two half-buried rocks. Moses nearly tripped before realizing his foot was stuck, and he pulled hard. The two half-buried rocks eventually gave Moses his sandal back, but not before tearing the strap off one side. Again, Moses sighed. He bent down and tried to fix the strap. There was no fixing it, but it would probably last until he got home and could repair it then. Maybe it was time for a new pair anyway. The wilderness was hard on sandals. Moses straightened up again. He lifted his eyes. For a moment he panicked. Almost right in front of him, the bushes were on fire. He would need to get the sheep moving immediately. Get them away from here, away from the fire. But no, it wasn't the bushes. It was just one. Moses tried to understand what was happening. It was burning, but it wasn't being burnt. He stepped closer to the flames. Impossible.